So In My Zone would probably be the most unique song on that album. When In My Zone comes on, like it it should give the listener a sense of, wow, I didn't see that coming, right? Because it has such a unique sound in comparison to everything else on the album. And it is really like a EDM slash hip hop mashup, so to speak. So I love In My Zone because of its uniqueness, and I love how it still flows with the overall aspect of the album, as far as, my journey and me, staying focused and staying diligent, staying in my zone when it comes to the album. But as far as the beat itself, the beat actually was part of the collection of beats that I already had. All right. And making the beat, I remember the first thing that I did when I made the beat was I ended up finding this really, really interesting loop online that had this particular sound. Now, when I heard it for the first time, I was like, man, that really just makes you want to kind of dance or at least move to it. You know what I'm saying? Bob and weave to it. So I was like, that sounded dope. Let me see what I could do to build on it. So the next thing I ended up doing when making this beat, I ended up just adding some kicks to it, right? And then I ended up having this right here. And, I wanted to keep that pace, that same moderate pace, you know what I'm saying? Because I feel like, that's the essence of EDM. When I think of EDM, I think of the fist pumping and, they was pumping to the to the kick and everything like that. So I was like, I got to have that in there, right? So that's where that idea for that kick came from. And then the very next thing that I ended up doing was adding this whole meteor shower sound effect right here, which goes something like this. Now, when I initially added this particular sound, it was pretty straightforward, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to have it bounce. I'm going to have it go from one ear to the other, swing back and forth. That way you kind of hear da 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 da, and in different ways. So I ended up creating a whole panning pattern to it and everything like that, and it ended up giving me that dope unique sound. And then once I ended up putting it with the other two things, it just created an awesome sound. Now from this point, the very next thing I was like, we gotta have some claps. I mean, that's like essential to EDM, just as essential as, the kick, that moderate kick. So I ended up just adding some claps to it, and it's a simple clap. It's just clapping. Now, from this point, that's when I was like, all right, I'm actually heading in the right direction. You know what I'm saying? It's really giving me the vibe that I was looking for, making the beat and everything like that. So it's just a matter of just continuing to add certain things to it that really made sense. So the very next thing that ended up coming about was the big room hi-hats. Now, this was a very interesting sound when I first heard it, and that's this sound right here. Well, I'm sorry, no, that's this sound right here, the dark pad. This was a very interesting sound. This is the sound I'm referring to. Right? Once I heard that, I was like, ooh, that kind of gives like, a dark element to it. It kind of complements the other high part. It kind of gives it a weird play between the two. So I was like, yo, that's dope. So playing them together, you get this really cool sound between that part and the other part. So you get this right here. You know what I'm saying? And it kind of just created this sandwich of high, doo-doo, and then ooh, ooh, ooh. It's just like, just all of these weird elements of sounds, that, and it came together. And then from this point, it was just a matter of just adding something with faster pace to it, just for the hip hop parts. And that's where the hi-hats right here came in. And that's kind of what rounded it off. Now, the funny thing about this is, once I had this done, when I initially had it, it was just like this and it was dope. Once I came up with the actual hook, once the hook came into the picture, the in my zone, feeling like I never ever felt before, I started listening to the hook on the beat and I was like, it sounds too simple. It's not. I think I need more of a more complex drums, right? So what I did was I ended up contacting Prince, the producer who did No Games, and I was like, yo, I know you play drums heavy, like that's your primary instrument. You think you could come up with a dope drums or a dope drum sequence to go with this? So he ended up creating this dope drum sequence, and it fitted perfectly. But once I kept singing my song to it, I was like, nah, it's too complex. You know what I'm saying? And it was one of those things I was like, well, this is what I wanted, but now it's not what I wanted, because now it doesn't make sense to the song, because the hook that I'm singing is really simple and I kind of like the space in between it. So I ended up going right back to what I had before, and I came to the realization that the song, like the drum pattern just needed to be simple for the song. So, and I was one of those instances when I thought I had a good idea, but in fact, it turned out to be a bad idea. And then I went back to what I had before, but it ended up working out for the best. Now, when it came to, once I laid down the hook, that's when all the other elements came into the picture. So these are the elements that I added once I knew what I was going to do with the song, once the in my zone part of it came to life, right? So the first thing I added was this right here, which is an analog stack synth, and it sounds like this. Right? So I added that, and then of course I added the grinding riff specifically for the hook, and that's this sound right here. And that sound, like, it was dope because I was like, it got such like a it's almost like a Caribbean rhythm to it, but it still sound like sci-fi spaces. So I was like, man, that's dope. I'm gonna keep that in there with this part, and they're gonna create something cool. Right? And then I was like, how many weird sounds can I really add to this thing before it starts sounding bad? So I was just like, let me see what else I can find. Then I ended up finding this seismic sound right here, which gave this sound in particular. And I was like, okay, at this point, I was like, okay, I might be adding too much. But once I put it all together, everything just ended up kind of fitting in this weird little way, between these three. So now, when you're hearing it, you may not notice all those different things going on in the beat, but there was a lot of different sounds that I had on this beat as far as just random sounds from left to right. And I even added, to the second part of the hook, I added this part right here, which is just a whole nother pad, and that goes like this. Right? Right? And that was pretty much like the last part of it. And these all got added after I knew what I was going to do with the hook. So when you put it all together, yeah, it's a lot going on, but I don't know. It kind of worked. It kind of worked. And that was my hook. That was my hook for In My Zone. So, I mean, how much we got here? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 different sounds. You know, drum just being one sound and everything else. So, yeah, this one was just I don't know, I guess a melting pot or a salad of just a bunch of different flavors and sounds. And I just kept adding and it just kept sounding good. So I just kept adding up until this point. So at this point, I was like, all right, I'm definitely done now. I'm definitely done. Not going to add anything else. So I made the hook and the hook sounded dope. Now, at this point, the hook and the verses sounded identical. There was like no change to it. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want when the verse to come in to just give me a completely different sound altogether, right? Not completely different, but not so repetitive from the hook. So what I ended up doing is I ended up taking out the grinding riff. I ended up taking out the dark pad, right? And then I took out these three, right? And I kept this one right here, the analog synth, and I also added one instrument just for the verses itself. And that instrument sounds like this. Now, when you're listening to the track, you're only going to hear that part during the verses. That part is not in the hooks or anywhere else in the song. It's literally during the verses only. So that when you have that transition, it's an obvious transition from the hook to the verse. So, or from the hook to the verse. So just to let you guys hear that transition, this is the end of the hook leading into the verse. You see how I switched up? And that was the last thing that I did to it to really just give it some diversity. Now, from this point, I was just like, man, it's awesome. It sounds great. I ended up putting the hook on there. Then I ended up putting my verse on there. And everything sounded dope. And I was like, you know, I kind of want to feature for this song as well. Like I said, I love to collaborate. I love hearing different sounds on one project. So Midnight came to mind. Now, Midnight is one of my oldest friends, especially when it comes to, you know, music. Actually, we started off as co-workers first, and Midnight was the first artist that I knew, the first friend that I had who actually was doing music independently, right? So during this time, I mean, I didn't even think that was a thing. You know what I'm saying? I just thought that the famous people were the famous people. I didn't even know there was a whole independent music, you know, market or a whole underground music scene, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, Midnight, you know, been to his show before and everything like that. I watched him perform. I'm like, man, this is dope. So we've been friends ever since. And I'm talking about this is even before I even started with our group. When I started doing music, I wasn't doing any music when I knew Midnight. You know, we were just co-workers, you know, and we've been friends ever since, still to this day. You know, we're practically brothers at this point. But I hit Midnight up and I was like, yo, you usually have a, you know, an interesting way of hopping on these tracks. So how do you, what do you feel about, you know, collabing with me? And he was like, you know, I'm down, you know what I'm saying? So he ends up coming in and he ends up laying down his verse. And this man is actually singing on some of the parts of the verse. I'm like, oh, snap. All right, Midnight, I see you, dog. So what ends up happening is when he does like the end part of his verse, when he's singing, I'm like, oh man, he inspired me to jump in there. So I ended up jumping in there and adding my part to it at the end. And it ended up creating such a dope sound leading into the last part of the chorus. And that actually became my favorite part of the song. So all in all, man, In My Zone was just one of those songs. It was just a beautiful mess. You know what I'm saying? It has a uniqueness to it. Doesn't sound like anything else on the project. You know, it captured the essence and the feel that I kind of wanted at that particular point of the album, because everything before, I feel like Breadwinners was really ending off that whole Paths section of the album. You know, it started with Paths, it ended with Breadwinners. So I was now going to move to the third part of the album, where it's more of the I would say the soft music, you know what I'm saying, or the R&B music, or the inspirational music, you know what I'm saying. So this was the last song before I got to those batches of songs on the album. So I wanted to kind of surprise people before I got to that one pocket of sounds, and that's what In My Zone ended up being. It ended up finishing off as an amazing track. I absolutely love it. I love it for its uniqueness. I love it for how it was created, and I just absolutely love every aspect of it. And I honestly feel that this album wouldn't have been the same without it. You know what I mean? It's just such a beautiful song, and every time I listen to it, I can't help but to dance. It might be the only song on here that could really just get me to move every time I listen to it. You know what I'm saying? But that's In My Zone. That's how it was created, and that's pretty much it.